Welcome to Fitness or Fiction. Today we are talking about you are not your condition. This is something that has really deep underpinnings that we're going to get to, but I'm joined with my co-host here, Senator Berg.
And Master Curtis Howden. He's the handsome one with the big biceps.
No, I can't do handstands. I can't do the handstands. It's not fair. So today we're talking about you are not your condition, and this is something that we have run into in a variety of different circumstances. We're going to talk about a few different protocols today, or a few different lenses, I guess. So we can talk about this from kind of stuff that we've been through and, challenges that we've had physically throughout our careers. But we're also going to talk about it from the perspective of, this is what we're presented with when people come to see us for training and dealing with the challenges that they have, or maybe pathologies or things that have been pathologized, like, oh, you have X, therefore you have to. So getting into that realm, and then, of course, talking about clients that have worked through some of that. So
yeah. For me, I think people put too much merit into these traits that they identify with, like having a bad back, let's say. When people identify with having a bad back and that's just who they are, like, oh, don't let Curtis lift that because he has a bad back. Everyone baby Curtis because Curtis has a bad back. Everyone, I feel like people are trying to be gracious and compassionate towards Curtis's bad back, but then you always find that normally that person's kind of pissed off, like, oh, it's fine, I'll be okay, and they kind of like grudge on through it, but you kind of become that person with the bad back, or you become that person with this condition. And I think generationally speaking and culturally speaking, I think people are struggling a lot with just like identity overall. It gets into a much bigger topic, and I personally don't want to get into all of it.
we're not getting into the whole ball of wax, but this is an important part.
Yeah, just like identity. Who's Curtis? Like,
yeah, so the way that people look at you, that's deeply challenging for somebody that is dealing with something, when people then attach that as part of who they are. It's a really big challenge, and the way that would feel, you can imagine, is pretty bad. That's why you'll see this kind of push to call, like, somebody who has MS, for example. You'll see under the studies PWMS, person with MS. So it's like the person first sort of language, because identifying somebody as that as a primary indicator sucks. Like, that's not something that's fun.
yeah.
So this episode really came out of the idea that I was talking to a client of mine. Her name's Steph, and she had bad back pain for ages. And I had a friend of mine named Steph, refer Steph, and she said, this girl needs help with her back. Can you do something? She lives far away from you. Can you do online? I said, yeah, of course. Like, we can talk through it. And we started training together, and what I recognized is something that I recognize with a lot of clients, where it's like, well, this is who I am. It's just what I have. And it's like, well, did you know that's not permanent?
It's like a borderline form of acceptance, but
yeah, except for less productive. It's like, well, I'm going to accept this as a permanence, even though it doesn't have to be.
Mm-hmm.
Or even worse, the narrative I've been told is that this is permanent.
Well, this also goes hand in hand with our previous episode on injury and learned helplessness. When you start to identify with the, it's because it's my fault, and everything's going bad and it's never going to change. Mm-hmm. And if you follow that same track pattern for whatever your condition is.
Right. So this is really just kind of building off of that, where you need to break free of that concept. And, even if you're dealing with something that is technically permanent, it's never going away. It doesn't mean your function has to be the same. It doesn't mean that you don't have control to do the best you can do. Mm-hmm. And even if you are losing, it doesn't mean that you can't try to optimize the best that you can be.
Yeah. And that was what I wanted to talk on this episode anyways. Like, for me, anyone who's listened or followed me in the last 2 years anywhere knows that I've been struggling with some stomach problems. Just like probably some food sensitivities and things like that. Things aren't agreeing with my stomach. It's taken me longer than normal to maybe identify with it or become fully locked in on it, just out of stubbornness and stupidity of like, yeah, maybe I can have it anyways, maybe I'll try it anyways. Like, I just had pizza and that wasn't a good idea. But where am I going with this? Dealing with my bad stomach, identifying with that condition, and doing what's in your control. So doing what's in your control, I've been following a lot of Stoic philosophy, and one of the primary foundations of that is like dealing with what's in your control. For me, when I had bad stomach days, when my food like wasn't digesting, I didn't want to do anything. I'm just like, oh, it started to feel like this is who I am, and I wouldn't even try to lift. Whereas like having the approach of like doing what you can and doing it to the best of your ability, regardless of circumstance, like whatever your best is, and your best fluctuates from day to day. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, for me, I think a future episode that we're gonna deal with is gonna be something related to you only get one shot. Like something that hits me really hard as a new parent is you have this beautiful time with your kids when they're 0 to 5. It's all sunshine, and there's the meltdowns and stuff in there, but that's small details. So that's minutia that you're not gonna remember. The way that they look at new things, the enthusiasm they have, like they are rays of sunshine.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that you need to really soak up because it's never coming back.
Yeah.
And like the amount of people that come up to us and say, oh man, I remember when my kids were that age. I wish it was back. I'm just trying to make sure that I enjoy it enough so that I can be really happy when my kids aren't that age, because it is a blessed time.
Yeah.
But one of the things that we need to understand is the longer that we let things go, it's like, well, I'm not going to do that because, I feel like this is my fault. So I'm just going to let it slide. I'm going to go down a bad path. When we make that choice, we are engaging the wrong way with what we're dealing with. So a good example would be, I have a lot of clients that come to me and say, oh yeah, well, I have arthritis in my knees.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, are you over 35? And they're looking at me really weird because they know that I know. They're like, well, yeah. And I'm like, oh, cool. Well, welcome to everybody. Like, you're going to have degenerative changes, but how come you can have a large majority of people that are major league pitchers have labral tears in their shoulder and they're absolutely symptom free? They're taking care of their joints. They're doing what they can, living within their control. So, you are not your condition is really a build off of the 3 Ps in the learned helplessness section. It's you need to identify for yourself that regardless of what the reality of your situation, you need to realize that your identity is more than that. That's only a small piece.
Mm-hmm.
And there's things that we get to choose about our identity, and there's things that we don't get to choose about our identity. For example, the family that you're from. You don't get to change that even if you're not happy with it. It's part of your identity, and you can change how you handle it, but you're never changing who your mother and father are. That's a good example. There's some conditions that you don't get to choose. Oh, I wiped out when I was skiing, and now I have this. That's okay. That happened, and you need to deal with that, and that's that kind of learned helplessness thing. But at some point, you need to look at yourself and say, I'm not that. That doesn't define who I am. And with my same client, Steph, that I mentioned, she's been without back pain for some time now. And she was sharing with me that her frustration is that people say, oh, you shouldn't be doing that. You can't do that because you have back pain. It's like, so you've mistaken something that I was dealing with for a time as a permanence in my identity.
Mm-hmm.
And for her, she's stepping outside of it. And her anger on that is actually really good for me. I'm like, yeah, you don't see yourself as that. You don't identify with that anymore. And in injury recovery, it's really important that you get to the point where you see that there's something outside of what you're dealing with.
Yeah, 100%.
So one thing that I do find is that, I talked to a guy yesterday that he's just broken his femur. So he's a motorcycle rider. I got a lot of guys that do enduro cross and motocross. And he wiped out on the start of a kicker, and he said he knew right away what had happened. But he's like, oh man, I'm feeling so bad and whatever. And I was like, I don't know, this might sound a little bit mean, but I'm going to say it anyway. You get better, man. Like, that's so lucky. You broke your femur. That could be really bad. You could bleed out. There's all sorts of stuff. You didn't. Now you've got a broken bone and you're sitting in bed and you're like, oh, I don't get to ride my bike for 3 months.
Yeah.
Like, hold my beer, buddy.
Mm-hmm.
I know that's a big deal and I don't want to undermine it. I know you're going through some stuff, but just if you're going to play the what if game, play it all the way through. Like, oh man, I'm not able to ride my bike whenever. Well, keep playing that out. For how long? 3 months? Okay. Yeah, no problem. Like, you're going to do everything you can to recover. You're going to come back in 3 months, and it's like it never happened almost.
Mm-hmm.
Like that to me is, don't even play that game where it's part of who you are, because it's going to be gone so fast.
Yeah.
Like this thing's going to be over faster than a pair of braces.
I know that.
Yeah. So it's one of those things, but
Curtis just low-key just analyzed my teeth. He gave them the up-down. He's like, this dude had braces?
So
got
did
some fine chompers.
yeah, it's fine chompers. I had braces too.
Yeah, it's even dealing with these conditions, it's really hard, but one of the Stoic philosophies that I've been studying a lot on is like loving everything that happens to you, the good and the bad, because the bad is lessons and contrast to make the good even better.
Well, absolutely.
And that's a hell of a statement, and it's hard to wrap your mind around it, especially when something nightmarish happens to you. But to try to just love it rather than accept it, because it enhances, to a degree, I could say that your perception of life has been enhanced, potentially by valuing time more.
It's called post-traumatic thriving.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a client that actually studies this, and I was talking to him 3 days ago. And I was like, here's a song by Paul Brandt. It's called Rich Man.
Is that the song that's... Sing it.
Well,
Sing it.
I'll sing
Is it going like, you're a rich man? Or is that a different song?
No, that's Hall & Oates. That's, you're
Hall
a rich
Oates.
girl,
Yeah.
but you've gone too far.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
my bad.
No, Rich Man is different. He's talking basically, if all he has is wife and kids, then he's a rich man.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't need anything else. For me, that's true. It's always been true, but could I see through everything to understand how true that is and how much to cherish that before I had some sort of reality check that life is impermanent?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I saw it the same. So I wrote to my friend Charles. I was like, hey, would it be safe to categorize post-traumatic thriving as understanding the impermanence of life and the potential suffering that we're all going to deal with at some point, and choosing to embrace it and enjoy what's around right now even more so, regardless of knowing the truth of where it's going to go? And he was like, yeah, well, that's like, he listed a bunch of faiths and religions, and Stoic philosophy, Nietzsche, like a variety of places where they talk about suffering, including Buddhism, Christianity, like all of these things. And I just wrote back and I was like, isn't it interesting how, like, for all the things that humanity can't agree on, one thing that you'll see cross-culturally, cross-religion, is the value of suffering and how that creates almost a anchor for life, where it's like, well, listen, here's where things can go, so everything else is better than that.
Yeah.
So, this episode is one that's easy to get on a rant on, but basically chatting about this is just saying the first step to dealing with injury is understanding that you are not your condition. Whatever's happened to you, most of it, you can step outside of it. And if you can't, that doesn't mean that you don't have any control, no matter what anybody says. And, the last thing I would say on that is I talked to a guy that has a hiatus hernia last night. He's a client of mine, and he's like, well, I can't find any good information. All they said is don't lift heavy anymore. I said, do you think that's probably the best thing for you to do? Just, go backwards in your fitness, and just because you're afraid that something might happen, not that it ever has, even though you've been lifting consistently with these symptoms for 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, well, absolutely not. I was like, well, listen, it's something you're dealing with. It doesn't mean that your life has to stop.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Do you have any final thoughts on him?
No, I think it's a good episode. I think just, not over attaching yourself to your condition as priority and focusing on what you can control and moving forwards, and that control and divide exercise of just, that contrast of good and bad, I think is pretty valuable. But yeah. I like everything you had to say. It was good.
I like what you had to say too. I like that we're almost the same height. I'm actually a little taller because I don't have a stool, so take that.
All right. Thank you for listening. Hit the like button. Give us a comment or some feedback. We would love that.
Drop a subscription. Maybe get those alerts for a new episode,
Yeah.
Thanks for being here. We'll see you soon.
Thanks for joining us this week. We appreciate your support.
If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you would subscribe, follow, and throw us a like on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts.